Matthew 26:22 says, "And they were exceeding sorrowful, and began every one of them to say to him, Lord, is it I?" Mark 14:19, "And they began to be sorrowful, and to say to him one by one, Is it I?" Luke, "And truly the Son of Man goes as it was determined, but woe to that man by whom he is betrayed." Then, and they began to inquire among themselves which of them it was that should do this thing. So that could be the same, saying, "Is it I?" So are they inquiring among themselves, or are they inquiring of Jesus? Maybe I could have both. They began to inquire among themselves, and then one by one asked Jesus, "Is it I?" "He that dips his hand with me in the dish, the same shall betray me. The Son of Man goes as written by him." But woe to him by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. Okay. "22 is going to be combined with Matthew. So after that, Judas, which betrayed him, answered and said, "Master, is it I?" And he said, "You have said." So maybe he went by every single one and said no, but then he has to have this statement, "He that dips his hand with me in the dish." So he probably interrupts. As a few of them come up to him and say, "Is it I, is it I, is it I?" He says, "It's he that dips his hand," before he waits for all 12 to ask him, "Is it I?" Even though Mark says one by one, it doesn't necessarily mean every single one. They began to inquire among themselves. So they began. So I can have "they were sorrowful." Mark has "they began to be sorrowful," and "they began." So I could have "they began to be sorrowful" and "inquired." John's is the most descriptive and is pretty different. "Then the disciples looked one on another, doubting of whom he spoke." So they're just looking. Doesn't say they're sorrowful, doesn't say they're inquiring amongst each other, it does say they're looking on one another. That would seem to precede them inquiring amongst themselves. Well, actually, this might even be before they were sorrowful. He says the words, they look on each other, doubting. Then it starts to hit them. They feel sorrowful. Then they start to inquire amongst themselves. Then they question Jesus one at a time. "Is it I, is it I, is it I?" And then maybe they go on with John. "Now there was leaning on Jesus' bosom one of his disciples, whom Jesus loved. Simon Peter therefore beckoned to him, that he should ask who it should be of whom he spoke. He then, lying on Jesus' breast, says to him, 'Lord, who is it?' Jesus answered, 'He it is to whom I shall give a sop.'" So I'm not exactly sure if that is the same statement from Matthew. "He that dips his hand with me in the dish, the same shall betray me." Because in Matthew and Mark, how's it going, Mark? It is one of the 12 that dips with me in the dish. That makes it a bit more clear in Mark. It's like he's reiterating, it's one of you. "One of you which eats with me shall betray me." He's right here. But in John, it doesn't seem to be what he's saying. "He it is to whom I shall give a sop when I have dipped it." It's saying, okay, this is the sign. You. That's totally different than saying, he's here, he eats with us. So I think I'm going to have this second. "He that dips his hand with me," or one of the 12 from Mark, that dips with me in the dish. Woe to that man by whom he is betrayed. Now, I want to have it before Judas says, is it I? I could have, before Judas asks the question from Peter to John to Jesus, who is it? Jesus tells John specifically, he it is to whom I shall give a sop when I have dipped it. Dips the sop, gives it to Judas Iscariot. And before he says to Judas, that you do quickly, Judas sees that he gave it to him. Maybe Judas did hear. Maybe everyone heard. It's to whom I give this sop. Gives to Judas, and Judas is like, he knows. Then Judas says, as like a last-ditch attempt to act, is it me? Jesus says, you have said, then what you do quickly. I guess I could begin with the disciples looked on one another, doubting of whom he spoke. And they began to be exceeding sorrowful. And then they began to inquire among themselves. They were doubting and looking. Then they were sorrowful. Then inquired among each other. Then asked Jesus one by one, is it I? I think doubting should come first. Makes sense that the first thing after they hear it, they're in shock, looking at one another. They don't believe it. Then they're sorrowful. Then they question who it was. So I'm going to go with that. And it makes sense for this statement to come after they doubted, because Jesus says, truly the Son of Man goes, saying, yes, it's gonna happen. So they're doubting first. So John starts it. Then the disciples looked one on another, doubting of whom he spoke. Matthew seems to say that they were sorrowful and began every one of them to say, Lord, is it I? Maybe they are sorrowful before they question Jesus. So I'll have it the way Matthew has it. They were exceeding sorrowful. And I'll say it began for when they questioned Jesus. That next statement Jesus made comes after the questions, although the questions are directed at Jesus, not at each other. Maybe I could have the questions at Jesus first, then the question among themselves. Oh yeah, that makes sense. They question Jesus. Jesus interrupts them and says, it's he that dips his hand with me in the dish. Then while they're questioning among themselves, Peter leaves that argument directs a question at John to question Jesus, and this is like a side issue. John asks Jesus, Lord, who is it? And then Jesus answers him, or maybe them too. And maybe Judas hears it, or maybe he doesn't. I don't know. So they could be inquiring among themselves. And as a side issue, Peter, who is it? Jesus, it is he whom I've dipped this sop. Because only John has this statement, so maybe John's the only one who heard it. It's not in Matthew, it's not in Mark. Mark is written from an associate of Peter who asked this question. Maybe Peter didn't hear this response. Maybe this is just real quiet to John, who's real close. He gives it to Judas. Judas realizes he's making an indication, and then he asks the question. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. They'll have them questioning Jesus. Jesus interrupts. Then the response from Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And then they're questioning among themselves from Luke.